Hello, friends, and welcome back to r/ProRevenge. Today we have two brand new crazy revenge stories for you. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Our first story is, use my family for cheap labor and kick them to the curb? That's going to cost you. This story happened quite some time ago. I've never tried to seek out revenge before, but the way these people treated me and my family was utterly repulsive. So here we have my first ever and hopefully last revenge story. First, the setup. My family lived in a house that was owned by, according to one of my family members, let's call her Mary, benevolent landlords. After they'd lived there for 2 years on a lease, the lease expired, so they started living there on a month-to-month basis. Mary's husband, let's call him John, suggested that they renew their lease, but Mary, being convinced they had established a relationship of trust with the landlords, insisted that there was no need to do so. This was the first mistake. Sometime after, there was a storm that knocked over a relatively flimsy and frankly hideous chain-link fence that was built around the house. Now, because Mary and John kept important things in their yard, they needed a fence. The landlords were looking around for contractors to rebuild the fence, but John had an idea that he felt would be beneficial for all. You see, John and Mary really loved this house, and they were hoping to someday buy it from the landlord, something that the landlord had suggested as a possibility from time to time. John suggested that he build the fence instead. He would only charge for the materials required, and he would provide the labor at no cost under one important condition. The landlords must promise that they had no intention of selling the house. One landlord, we'll call him Benny, not only promised John that the house wouldn't be sold anytime soon, but even went as far as saying they would only ever consider selling the house to John and Mary. So a deal was made. John would rebuild the fence, more beautiful than it had ever been, and Benny and the other landlord would ensure that John and Mary would get to keep living in that house, enjoying the fruits of their labor, until the day the landlords finally decided to sell the house to them. John and Benny agreed upon the dimensions and material of the fence. They decided wood and decided the fence would be fairly tall. John bought the materials. Benny paid John for the expenses. Halfway through building the fence, John asked Benny whether he wanted certain changes in the backyard alongside the fence that would only serve to make the land value skyrocket. Benny said he'd love the changes. The next part's important. John looked Benny in the eye and said, in no unclear terms, if you have any intention of selling this house to someone other than us, tell me now and I'll stop this entire project. I'm only interested in building this under the condition that I will get to enjoy it. Benny responded equally clearly, you and your family will get to enjoy this home indefinitely. Feel at ease and do whatever you want with this yard. And so the fence was finished, and it was beautiful. This is the part where I come in. I came to visit my family, and I helped them finish the fence and clean up the yard. I wasn't particularly happy about the terms of this agreement, but there was nothing that could be done now. All right, here comes the part where my family gets effed. Hard. Not so much as a week after the fence had been built, Mary gets a call from the other landlord. Let's call her Jane. Jane tells Mary that something unexpected has occurred. See, her niece is currently on the market for a house, and she really wanted to see this particular house. Mary, who can feel herself getting riled, asks Jane how this could be. The fence was only just finished, and they're considering selling the house? Jane assures Mary that her niece will most likely not want the house, but that she has to let her see it. Very well. Now, I'm not sure about the details that happened shortly after, but it seems that Jane's niece didn't like the given price of the house, which was now more valuable than it was before, so she chose not to buy. Bullet dodged, right? If only. So Benny came to visit John and Mary with something they'd always wanted. Suddenly, the landlords wanted to sell, and an offer was made to my family. Now, my family's not wealthy, and they would have preferred to have been told well in advance of the intention to sell. Nonetheless, the offer that was presented was not unfair. My family says yes. Excellent. Yet as soon as my family was approved to purchase the house, Benny came back with a change. The landlords no longer wanted to sell the house at the original price. Instead, the price they had in mind had skyrocketed to roughly the same price as the most expensive houses in the area, a price John and Mary could no longer afford, and certainly more than the house was actually worth. That's not the worst of it, though. Suddenly, the landlords needed to sell the house immediately. John said to Benny, "We had a deal. and Benny responded that they suddenly needed the money because of a family member's needs. Later on, the story changed to them no longer needing the money, that it was Jane who needed the money because of some other piece of completely fabricated BS. The point was that they wanted to sell the house now to line their pockets, but could never stick to a single excuse. Again, John told Benny they had a deal. Benny's response, "I don't remember that. We never got anything in writing, so we never had any deal." Jane later told me a verbal agreement doesn't mean crap. Unfortunately, in the eyes of the law, nothing could be proven. We couldn't force them to sell the house to my family at the original price, and we couldn't force them to let my family keep living there. All right, thought my family, we just want to get paid for the labor that we put into the fence. This was not ideal, since they now needed to leave the home they'd lived in for quite some time, but they knew it wasn't theirs, and they weren't going to put up a fight over it. At this point, they just wanted to get paid for their labor. Benny and Jane didn't want to pay. My family members needed that money. Given that they were getting kicked out on such short notice, the money was needed in order to find a new place to live. Benny and Jane, however, insisted that they'd always been fair with the rent, and they simply didn't owe my family legally. I told Benny and Jane that we'd just take things to court and have a judge decide. Given the fear of the court, Benny and Jane decided they'd pay my family, but that the labor for this gargantuan monstrosity of a beautiful fence just wasn't worth much more than the materials it was made of. The labor couldn't possibly be that much, they reasoned. Also, they would only pay for the labor for the fence, not for the rest of the work that was done on the yard. Well, everyone decided to get an estimate. The average we got was $3,000 for labor. Benny and Jane managed to get one estimate from one of their family members at $350. What a effing joke. So the day to leave arrived, and Benny and Jane paid my family far less than what the labor was actually worth. My family left. We lost. We lost so much. The effort that went into building this fence with the intention of getting to enjoy it under the agreement that they would get to keep living there just to have it taken away and to barely even get paid for the labor, to get crapped on by these two F-wads. That was unacceptable to me. We couldn't win anymore. But I didn't want them to win either. So the revenge. I read up on fences. I learned far too much about was and wasn't allowed when it came to fences. I memorized every effing rule. I learned when permits were and were not needed. I learned what the allowed dimensions were, and I learned about whether fences needed finish. Oh boy, the things I learned about fences. I learned that you don't need a permit if your fence gets damaged so long as you're rebuilding the exact same fence. But this was wood, and the old one was chain link. I learned that the fence needed to be painted, but this one was not. I learned that the fence had a very specific height limit, one which this fence violated. These people were so happy to stick to the letter of the law when it came to screwing over my family, so I decided that I too would stick to the letter of the law. Somehow, the county found out that this fence was permitless, unpainted, and far too tall. Shortly after the county found this out, Benny and Jane got a visit from the county right before they managed to sell their house at their obscene price. When you know it, their fence was built illegally. Now, sometimes you can just get a permit after the fact, but their fence wasn't allowed to be built the way it was. There were no plans, no inspection, nothing else that the county required. It had to come down. My family got a very angry call. The landlords accused my family of never getting a permit, something that my family literally could not do given that it wasn't their property. Besides, it was the landlords who assumed no permit was needed, and my family knew nothing about how permits worked. So the fence had to be torn down. There goes the money they saved by not paying my family, and they lost their prospective buyer. There goes the money they wanted to make, and the land value of the house went down. There goes the price point they wanted to sell the house at. And they need to build a new fence, since no one will want to live in this house without some sort of fencing. Looks like they'll need to pay for a new fence, labor and all, from an actual contractor. We didn't win, but neither did they. F you. And our next story. Young and rude adults refuse to pay for public transport, but oh, sweet revenge at the end of the day. I work as a train driver. I drive smaller trains, mostly out in the countryside, and people are generally nice and well-behaved. But OFC, there are the alcoholics, drug addicts, and general weirdos that use public transport, and some people that just live to be a pain in the butt. So this was a few years ago. We were traveling in the late afternoon, and my conductor, let's say C, storms into the driver's cabin, angry and annoyed, and tells me, "We have 2 rude, good-for-nothing guys on board, and they are such a-holes." "What'd they do?" I ask. "They have no tickets, refuse to pay, and just laugh in my face. They're saying, 'What are you going to do about it?'" "What the hell? Should I help you throw them off at the next stop?" "We can't, because they're just traveling 1 station, so they're getting off at the next stop. Damn smug guys with their 'what are you going to do about it?'" So we're both angry. I let the conductor rant and let off some steam. Next stop comes, and the guys get off. The conductor angrily gestures at them. "There's them effers." We continue the short remaining journey and have a break at the end station. Some hours later, the train then goes back. Since it's on the countryside and it's a late weekend evening, the train's almost empty on the way back. The conductor knows where every passenger on board is getting off, and she's up front with me, chatting. All's fine again. Until we approach the station where we let those guys off. We see 2 people standing there. It's them. My conductor beside me shines up like a damn sun. She says with the biggest smile on her face, "Do not stop." And I'm just laughing, slowing down the train, not stopping though. When we pass them, my conductor opens the window, waves, and says loudly, "This is what I'm gonna do about it." The guys are just staring with their jaws on the ground when we drive past. We laugh all the way to our home station. We were the last train of the day. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video to the end, and I'll see you in the next one.